This time on Poll Hub, our new national poll has gotten a fair bit of attention, including from the president. So we thought we'd give it the old Poll Hub run through. We're going to talk about that. Then we're talking teachers. Recent data shows this critical career has some serious challenges, especially for what teachers think about their jobs. Then our fun fact is about one of our favorite topics, time and age. Lead will guide us on our journey through the past. That's going to be fun. Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Berengoff.
This week, President Biden got some better polling news. And it's still a very tight contest between him and former President Trump nationally. But NBC was out earlier this week with a poll that showed the president going from a -5 to a -2. Which probably wouldn't be as noteworthy if there weren't also a couple of other polls that showed the same thing. Marquette poll, their national poll, also showed Biden with an edge, although still Trump had the edge in Wisconsin. And we jumped into the fray by releasing our Marist poll results on politics and the November election from a new survey that we had done, part of a research project which immerses our Marist College students in the survey process. We'll be talking more about that project in the next couple of weeks. But right now, this most recent poll of Biden showed him with a 3-point edge over Trump nationally, but it also had some very interesting results under the hood. Lee, why don't you explain?
Every now and then you go to some numbers that go counter to the conventional wisdom. And if you listen to all the pundits and analysts and those who are following the races closely, the sense was that Robert Kennedy Jr., as a minor party candidate, as a third party candidate, was going to be draining more from Biden than from Trump. And we have in our statewide polls seen the opposite effect, where Trump seems to take in a little water where the Kennedy name is introduced. In this national poll, Biden's edge goes up, I think it was 2 or 3 points. I think it went from 3 to 5 or 3 to 6. In any case,
3 to 5, Lee.
Yep, 3 to 5, which certainly shows some movement in Biden's direction were Kennedy to get in. And that got a lot of attention, a lot of TV shows and newspapers and the like. And NBC also showed that same surprising pattern.
Let me ask. Trump's been spending most of his time in a courtroom while Biden has been out campaigning. Do you think that has anything to do with these latest numbers?
Overall, I'd say yes. I think what's happened to Donald Trump is, and I go back to 2016, Donald Trump was constantly moving the discussion around. The agenda was shifting, and the media was following the bouncing ball. Hillary Clinton was stuck in one place and getting a pounding on her emails and servers, as you recall. Right now, Joe Biden is the one who's moving the topic around, going out campaigning, having a lot of commercials because he has a lot of money to spend, and the topics are wide-ranging and targeted. Whereas Donald Trump is taking a daily pounding. It's legal, and it's courtroom, it's the same visual, it's the same legal, and that is his campaign for all present purposes. And I think that's having an impact on the character of this race. Mary?
What I think is really unique about this election is it's a rematch from 2020. And so we have a unique perspective to be able to take a look at the 2020 presidential election results. And so where are we seeing the shift happening? Among which groups are we seeing the shift in support occurring?
Well, I think it's a little bit of a continuation of the inversion we've seen in our politics lately, where the Democrats have been doing better among upscale voters, higher educated, higher income, and have been more suffering lately in the industrial Midwest and among blue-collar workers. Interestingly, some areas that Biden is not doing as well with against Trump this time is among younger people, among some independents, but he's doing much better among older people and whites generally. And that's the number I'm really looking at on. Hillary Clinton got 37% of the whites in 2016. Joe Biden got 41 last time. And right now he's just a little bit shy of 50. I believe it's 48%. And the whites might be a shrinking group overall in the electorate, but they're still the largest single group. And if you want to have a group that you're doing better with, do better among the big group. So I think that's what we're seeing, the change in these numbers. Not surprising. You've got some Nikki Haley voters out there who are not happy with Donald Trump. We saw in I think it was Pennsylvania, Tuesday night in this primary, that in the Republican primary, even though it's all over, Nikki Haley's been out of the picture for a long time, she's getting about a third of the vote, 30% of the vote, showing just a protest vote within Republicans. It's a closed primary in Pennsylvania, no independents, just Republicans, and yet as a non-candidate, she's still getting a hunk. So there's some people out there on the Republican side who are shopping around, while Joe Biden is doing somewhat worse among some of the smaller groups that he did well with last time, but doing better among the larger group, the white voters.
Mary, you mentioned that this is a rematch, and certainly both of these candidates are incredibly well known to Americans. And in this latest poll, we continue to see their favorable ratings. In other words, people's impressions of them upside down, meaning certainly they're higher negatives, both over 50% on negatives, and more so than people have a positive opinion of each of them. But when it comes to November, people are going to have a choice. And are there groups within the electorate that we're seeing right now that may be more persuadable than others? And I'm not sure if they're going to be voting for one or the other candidate. They may be choosing to do something totally different, stay home. But what does that look like?
In terms of when we look at the head-to-head matchup among those who say they definitely plan to vote, and this is something that I wanted to bring up, is that Biden is plus 7 percentage points over Trump, 53% to 46%. I think that's really interesting because we talk about the electorate generally. It gives us the sense of the mood, the tone, where people are going to vote in general. But when we look at that group of what I consider like the hardcore voters who say, I'm going to vote no matter what, I think we get a really clearer sense of where the race stands. But also, I'm going to raise a question that I know Jay has raised in the past. It's the middle, pushing the end of April. There are a lot of months before we get to Election Day. So, what does this mean from a polling standpoint? For poll consumers, what do they need to be aware of when discussing the polls this far out from Election Day?
Sure, they're not predictive, but I think it does give us a sense of how things are mishmashing around. A couple of the points that Lee mentioned in terms of the kind of the distance that younger folks are showing towards the Democrats in general. Biden's better showing right now, particularly among older white Americans. I think that is very telling. But you have a good point. Not only is it early, but I think there's a context of the courtroom that is involved here as well. And as again, Lee, you mentioned the Hillary Clinton comparison. Even though in our polls, people, at least Republicans, say that they are still backing the president regardless of what happens in those courtrooms. And I think we do see proof of that in these polls by his strong showing among Republicans. But there's a wish-washy group in the middle, independents in particular, and particularly those who have an unfavorable opinion of both of these candidates. And I think right now, what's telling in these polls is that the election is really in their hands, because they are the ones that will tip the scales in their decisions either to vote or not to vote, and for whom.
Or to skip a line, or to skip the line entirely and vote for Senate or Congress.
I thought it was also very interesting in the NBC poll that they also found that there is a much lower interest in the campaign right now. That interest among voters in general has waned. And they pointed to their polling from 2008 till now. And among those who are most likely to vote or most interested in the election, those who rate it as a 9 or a 10, that proportion is down to less than 2/3 of voters. It's at 64%. Now, granted, in 2016, that number at this time was 69%. Barry, you certainly make a good point that a lot can change between now and November. But I think this does give us a glimpse into what is going on and certainly what the candidates and campaigns are thinking.
I know we have to wrap. I just wanted to make one point. We've seen in the past 2 elections that Donald Trump has been immune to a lot of what's going on in terms of his drama and in terms of his controversies. This may be the one thing that punches through and that he cannot necessarily survive. So it will certainly be interesting as moves forward.
We will learn about that as time goes forward. And that's what teachers help us do, is learn. Oh, that was a tough transition there. Anyway, we want to talk about teachers. There's a new Pew poll out that's really fascinating. It talks to Americans about what they think about education and teaching, and then it talks to the teachers as well about how they feel about their jobs and their careers. And what's, I think, so salient about this is that we've talked a lot about education a lot over the last few years because of COVID and what happened. And we've talked about the statistics showing students sliding back in terms of their performance. We've talked a lot about these things, but we haven't really focused on, so where do Americans think education is at right now? So a couple of numbers, and then let's get into it. So Pew asked teachers, what is the one thing they wanted Americans to know about teaching? 51% said it's a hard job. Despite watching Abbott Elementary and thinking it's all fun and games, it is a hard job, according to teachers. And maybe that's because 51% of Americans in this poll say that the country's public K through 12 education system is going in the wrong direction. Parents aren't feeling so great, or Americans, I should say, aren't necessarily feeling so great about what public education looks like. Teachers feel like it's a hard job. Maybe they're not appreciated. In that same poll, 32% are not sure about K through 12 education, and only 16% say that it's going in the right direction. Mary, I want to start with you because you are the mom, so you get all the mom, kid, teacher questions to start with anyway. What's your reaction to this, especially dealing with not only teachers that you deal with your own kids, but also you hear from moms, you're with other moms and dads. Does this fit with your experience?
So first, I can't speak to public education. My children are in parochial school, but the short answer is, teaching is a hard job. And what I will say is, and again, I'm not an education expert, nor am I a policy expert, but as Jay, you pointed out, I am a parent. And I think that it all stems from expectations. We all want our kids to do well, but there are different definitions of what doing well means, right? So there's this idea of students doing well in the sense that they're getting good grades, or that they're achieving well on state tests, or are they actually really learning and understanding and absorbing the information and still having a childhood? And so with that comes the expectations from the state and national level in terms of guidelines. And then you've got expectations that are placed on the administration going down, and then on teachers. And then teachers do get the brunt of it, because which parents don't want, I shouldn't say the brunt, but they do have a hard time. They get complaints from parents. They're giving too much homework. They're giving too many tests. They're giving too few tests. They're giving too little homework. And teaching is a hard job, but at the same time, parenting is a hard job. Being a kid is a hard job when the expectations come down onto them, and the stress from the teachers flow down onto the students. And it's just a bad cycle.
I'm struck by the sense of resources, the sense that teachers feel 70% feel that they're understaffed in their school. So these are things that add to the stress that make all things worse, because like nurses and other, frontline positions, if you feel that there's too much to do and there are not enough on your side doing it, it's going to become a problem in terms of your attitude. And then that just spins off into all other kinds of things.
I think that teaching has never been easy, despite the fact everybody thinks teachers get the summer off. But it's always been challenging. But I think there are a couple of pretty large contextual issues that are also impacting teachers and their ability to teach. And one is certainly something that we've seen for quite some time, which are the parents being very involved. There was a point at which people were bemoaning the fact that parents sent their kids off to school and didn't want to really hear from them again. And now I think we've moved into a time where that's completely the opposite, where parents are engaged. And that is a good thing, although stressful for teachers. But the larger contextual issues are also the fact that there's less trust in education overall. I think that's part of the lack of trust that we are seeing, or the decline in trust we're seeing for many institutions. And education is certainly one of those. We see that in higher education as well. And so the idea of the teacher being the expert and knowing what the proper curriculum should be, or the proper path for teaching a particular subject, I think has eroded. I don't think the input is a bad thing, but I understand that certainly that puts extra pressure on the system. And then the second thing is that our educational system has become incredibly polarized and it has become very political, and that there are issues that have been brought to the playground, so to speak, and it's tough. It's very polarizing. It gets to the heart of what people feel are their values and how they want their children to be taught and in what way that should be taught. And it's a very fine line, especially in districts where the curriculum may be saying one thing and the parents are saying something very different.
I liken the job of the teacher today to Little League umpires. We always hear about the parents screaming at the umpires because Johnny is not doing well, not getting enough playing time, playing the wrong position. And now I'm thinking maybe that's come off we now have, Jay would use the gamification of education. In other words, in the classroom, you now have the equivalent of letting off the steam if you're just having some issues. I guess parents are about less shy, just like when they're watching their kids play ball.
In a lot of districts, though, it's even more than that. They've become a political football by politicians to mobilize people to vote one way or another, or to support or oppose particular policy. And so that really puts them on the firing line.
Yeah. The thing that I think worries me most about this is when a Gallup poll asked teachers, would you advise a young person to become a teacher? And 52% said no. And what bothers me about that is that public education is foundational to not only a successful democracy, but to a successful country. And we look around the world in the countries that are successful, that people can live in relative peace and relative prosperity. They all have foundationally strong public education systems. And for us to be so down on this, I think does get at this zeitgeist that we're in, Barb, of no trust of any institutions. But this one is among the most concerning to me because of how critically important a good public education system is to us succeeding as a people and as a country.
Yeah, Jay, that struck me as well. That statistic definitely struck me as well. And when you think about it, aside from the home, who are children spending the most time with? They're spending the most time with their teachers, and they're the role models. And so it's so important for them to have leaders in the classroom to help mold and shape them and to help reinforce or to help complement the experiences that they're having in the home and what they're learning in the home, because it really does go hand in hand.
Turning to this week's fun fact, it's a topic related to things I love to talk about, as you folks know, and that's age and generations and decades and how things have changed and what's good and what's bad. So CBS 60 Minutes Vanity Fair poll in 2011 asked, looking back over the past 80 years or so, which of the following do you think was the best decade to live through? The 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, etc., the 90s, or at that point in time, the last decade, which is when you get to the first 10 years of this century. There was a lot going on, but we hadn't gotten to the really intense political gridlock that we have today. So that might be certainly a negative for currently. But I go back, and I'll start this off. I look at this list, and I always wonder, when were the good old days? And I never can really find them. But if I had to pick one, I would be with the second largest group. 21% say the 80s, 20% say the 90s. I like the 90s. I think of these. Why? Jay?
Yes, we're all on video watching each other, so you listening don't understand that Mary and I are both going, what? Our faces are going, what?
What was happening at Yankee Stadium during the 90s?
Oh, boy.
Does the Core 4 ring a bell? How about World Series ticker tape parades?
How about the late 70s and the Yankees and the Dodgers rematches? Wasn't that like the greatest time, especially the city coming out of disaster and near bankruptcy, and Reggie Jackson stepping up and bringing back the Yankees and the pinstripes?
But there's more to this than just sports, guys, right?
No.
So what do the rest of you think? I mean, is that your good decade, Jay? Are you going?
Oh, you're going to ask me next? Yeah. I was surprised you picked the 80s. I'm like, I didn't know you were a big Duran fan. I would say that the best decade to live in is related to how old I was at the time, as opposed to what was happening at the time. And I think other people, based on the responses in this poll, I don't think that's how other people necessarily view things. I think they may view it as to what's going on. So for me, the 90s were the best because I was at an age and at a point in my career and point in life and in social life and everything else that was probably the best. I like it right now too, but if I got to pick a decade, I'd pick 90s.
It's interesting that you say that, Jay, because I think we did have a fun fact at one point which asked us about which decade we enjoyed the most, or what age.
Yeah, which age, yeah.
Yeah, which we enjoyed the most. And interestingly, I had a really tough time with this because I don't really think of events as being decade-based. And if I had to struggle and think about it, I would have probably go with the aughts because I like the technology burst that we had during that time, and the fact that by the end of the aughts, we have iPhones and we have all sorts of communication and computer technology, and it's just become something that is now second nature. And so I enjoy that part of it. But how about you, Athen? You have a little bit different perspective on these decades.
Yeah, I mean, I was only alive for one of them.
Be careful now. Be careful. I'm sensitive to whatever you're going to say, so be careful.
I don't know. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, like, do you look at it, like, politically, or am I looking at it, like, aesthetically? And I think politically, I don't know if I would want to go back to any of these times. But aesthetically, I feel like either the 90s or the 70s. I don't know. When I think of the 70s, I like the style and the music. So maybe go back to the 70s. But, there was also a lot happening that I wouldn't want to go back to. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you, Athen. A lot of it, my mind immediately went to music. And maybe we need to redo our full episode on music. But my brain immediately went to music, and it went to my stage in life, like you, Jay. And so the 80s and 90s are definitely top of my list. I, was a teenager in the 90s, and it was a good time. And also, Barb, to your point about events happening, it was pre 9/11, and that was certainly a turning point in my life. I feel it was, I hate to use the term, but it was a simpler time than before 9/11 happened. So I hate to be Debbie Downer, but that's how I was looking at it.
Yeah, and also, if you're talking about how many people are still alive today back when, only 1% said the 30s. The 30s were not a great time, but there aren't that many people still alive from that era. The 40s, obviously, World War II, not so hot. What I found interesting was, although the 50s, it bounces up to 18, the 60s and the 70s are low. And the 60s, where you had all kinds of social and political change and disruption. I find it interesting that people were not comfortable in the 60s. Only 11% look back at that with any kind of nostalgia, even though there's a pretty large group of people who are still alive at that point.
Can I make a dorky comment about this question, like a dorky polling comment about this?
Okay.
When we ask questions, one of the things that we really try to do, and one of the standards, is that a question should pretty much mean the same thing to everybody you're asking it to. And I think, although this seems like such a simple question and so straightforward, it actually means something very different to all of us. So I'm not sure it's actually measuring what we think it may be measuring.
Oh, and that's how we call
educational fun fact, right?
Yeah.
An educational fun fact, Lee.
Talk about Debbie Downer.
No, that's why we call this Poll Hub.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis and Rebecca Hendricks.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub.
And with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll
see you next time.